Creating a function block is as easy as dragging it from the project tree. So we're going to drag it from the project tree into an organization block, our main OB1, and we will get the call option dialog. Now this is where we can choose where our instance data is going to be stored. And because we're in an OB at the moment, the only place we can store it is in a global single instance data block. So if I click OK, we'll see that in the project tree, we now have a function block example underscore DB. Now this is an instance block, which means that it's closely coupled or tied explicitly to the interface of this function block. So if I go ahead and open this, we'll see that what we see in that table at the top of our function block, with the exception to temporary and constants, is what we see here. So this is all the stuff that's stored inside this data block. If I come back to, main OB1, we'll see that we now have an interface. So we're creating the call in our logic to function block example, and it's using function block example DB. And from here, we will plug in our input 1, input 2, our in out, our output, and our output 2. So remember, everything on the left of the function block is passed in, and everything on the right of the function block is passed out. And that's in keeping and only relative to ladder and some other graphical languages, which we'll go through. But in other languages, such as structured text, it's laid out slightly differently. But in this case, left to right, because the logic scans left to right. So I can put constants here, such as just typing true, and that will mean that I always pass a true into this input 1. And on this one, I can go ahead and put something like real temp 1. And right now, it's not declared. TIA Portal doesn't know what real temp 1 is. If I go to define tag, I'm going to create it as a local temporary. It already knows it needs to be a real because we're connecting it to a real on input 2. Click define, and it's added it up here as a temp. Now remember what I said in previous lessons or the previous section, that temps need to be initialized. Obviously, this is an example and we've not done that, but I'm just showing you that we can pass symbolic information in, and the value of that will be copied in. And this one here, which has the question marks on, this means that we must pass something. Like, we don't have the choice not to. If I delete this true here, you'll see that it's replaced with a grayed out false. That means if we don't put anything there, false will be passed in the absence of anything else. But we can't do that with a reference because it needs to know where this information is. So right now, we don't have an array 0 to 200 of real, so we would have to create one. So if I create array, and it would be array 0 to 200 of real. And now I'd be able to drag that in, and it would accept that as this information here is what's going to be used inside this function block. So just remember that we're passing by reference and we're not passing by copying the data. On this right side, we have the outputs. And again, we do not have to define where the information is going. If we don't define anything, it will simply be sort of visualized here, what the output is, but the information isn't being copied anywhere. It's just being shown here. Or we can put output 1, define that as a tag. We might say for this one, we don't want a local temp. We want to pass it to global memory. I don't recommend doing this. We should use a data block really, but for the point of showing you, this is now going to pass it to our global memory M2.0. And that means that we could go off and use M2.0. So M2.0. And you'll see that from this point onwards, we'd be using this, which has been populated by our function block. And that's sort of it in a nutshell when it comes to creating an instance. However, in the next section, we'll see that we have more call options than just creating this data block here. You can create function blocks and the instance data inside other function blocks, and the parent function block can retain all of the information for the instance within its own data set. So that's a very important concept to understand, because for project organization, it makes a real difference instead of just creating these underscore DBs for every single type of function block that you call. And just before we end the lesson, I just want to show that you can create whoops, I'm dragging the wrong thing. You can create a second instance, or as many instances as you need to or want to. And if I call this one DB2, I'm now free to pass different information in on this one. This one I could pass true. I could create another real temp, or I could just pass 2.5, for example. I could still pass the same array. So all function blocks are using the same array data. And I can decide that I actually want this one to go to %m2.1. And that will create a tag for me. And basically what this means is this one right now will have an output of false because our input 1 is false. Whereas this one would have an output of true because our input 1 is true. But they don't have anything to do with each other except for they share this array data, which is passed by reference. Again, could be confusing to people who are brand new, but it will become much, much clearer as we move on.